Hello again, everybody. We're back. We're here to chat about our second show of the trip. So today is Sunday, which most shows on Broadway only do one show on Sunday. Usually they do a matinee, but there are some shows that do a Sunday evening or a Sunday matinee and a Sunday evening, and a couple of off-Broadway shows that do Sunday evenings as well. So if you want to make Sunday a 2-show day, you can, even though most shows only do one performance on Sunday. So we kind of strategized when we were planning the trip out, and kind of figured out like what shows had Sunday evenings and kind of prioritized those for Sunday evenings. So we're not going to talk about our Sunday evening show first. We're going to talk about our Sunday matinee, which was Suffs, which was nominated for the Tony for Best Musical this year and won for Best Book and Best Score, and really well-deserved Tony wins on Book and Score, both of which are by Shayna Tabb, who also stars in the show as the lead character, and we'll talk about her more in this video. Suffs is all about the women's suffrage movement in America, and really goes through a huge amount of time. I mean, the show starts in, what did they say, 1913? And goes through 1921?
Well,
21, 22?
If you include the last
If you
scene,
include the
it really
epilogue, it goes into the 70s.
But that's for like a hot minute.
Yeah, the vast chunk of the story, I mean, goes through more than 10-year span of the women's rights movement in the early 1900s, and really inspirational story, and one that I just don't think we talk about enough. I honestly, most of what I know about this movement is now from the show, and not from what I learned in an AP US history class.
Yep.
Or even a college US history class. We don't talk about these women enough, and that really kind of makes me angry, but I'm glad that this show does it, and does it so well and with so much dignity and respect towards the women. They don't give that much dignity and respect to Woodrow Wilson, and that's probably probably rightfully deserved. I mean, there's a lot to criticize him about for the way he handled this particular situation, but this is one that we really were looking forward to seeing, because of how good the score is. We've listened to the cast album a few times, and it's just a beautiful score that, like, the more you listen to it, the more you realize how well crafted it is. We were looking for
a very Hamilton feel.
Yeah, it's like, I feel like this show is like if Hamilton and Ragtime and Six had a love child, it's this show, because we've got the historical elements that Hamilton does. We've got, but with a kind of more contemporary feel in the way that the songs are written. We're not using rap in this one, but it does still sound, I mean, especially the younger characters sing in a bit more contemporary style than you would expect them to, given the time period that they're in. And the entire cast is female. So even the male characters are played by women, which honestly, like, it's a little weird listening to that on the cast album, because you don't, you're only listening, you're not seeing them, but once you see them in costume and you see how they're carrying themselves as men, honestly, I never even really thought about it the whole show.
Not at all.
It's just a thing that they do, and I love that sort of, like, it's their story, so, like, they're reclaiming it, which is, I think, a brilliant, asset or aspect of the show. But this was one that we were really looking forward to. We didn't buy tickets in advance because it hasn't been, I mean, it's been doing well in terms of ticket sales, but it hasn't necessarily been, like, selling out. And we're also coming to New York at, like, a non-peak time, so we were like, if there's any shows that we want to save a little bit of money on, this is probably one of them, because we could probably get rush seats. We couldn't get rush seats today. We had issues with the subway,
and I don't mean the restaurant.
We started our day with a walking tour of Soho and Little Italy and Chinatown, and we got to the getting to the subway station from where we ended the tour was easy, and then we were standing there for our train forever and realized that the train that we needed wasn't running this weekend because of track maintenance. So we had to it took us about 45 minutes to an hour longer to get to the Music Box Theater to try to get rush tickets than it should have. And by the time we got there, they were all out. But the guy at the box office got us some tickets in the mezzanine for like $10 more than what rush tickets usually go for. So we got good seats, and we, I think, got a decent price on them. So always, check for those deals. There's tons of deals to be had out here.
I mean, honestly, I don't think, granted I haven't been in every Broadway house, or off Broadway, but in every one that we've been in, there's not really a bad seat in the house. Some might have a little bit of an obstructed view, but these,
these theaters are so old, and they're
small.
They're small,
like compared to what we are used to in like Los Angeles, or I grew up in Denver.
Yeah.
In the touring houses that are meant to pack in a whole lot of people for a short period of time.
I mean, the Austin, the Bass Concert Hall
in
Austin.
Thousands of people.
Yeah, I mean, what we're used to
in theaters.
What we're used to in Austin is the Bass Concert Hall, which seats over 3,000 people. I think the biggest Broadway house is about half of them. Mm-hmm. So that really, I mean, there isn't really a bad seat typically, but we got good seats at the last minute. I'm really glad we saw this show. There's some good stuff and some not so good stuff, and I think this is one that really the material is fantastic. The book and score are brilliantly written.
Pacing's good.
The pacing's good, which is like crazy given the amount of time that they're dealing with and the amount of characters. There are so many historical women that are central to the plot of this show, and I feel like all of them are given the time that they need for you to really care about them and understand why they care so much about fighting for this, and that it's not just about them specifically, it's about the generations after them. They consistently reference they want their daughters to know that they did this, they're doing this for their grandchildren, their great grandchildren, generations that haven't even been born yet. And it really, I think, does a great job at telling their story in a very respectful way, and in a way where you don't feel like any of them have been left out of the narrative or that any character's been underdeveloped, which is just a testament to Shayna Taub and her writing. And by the way, this was about 50% of the show was rewritten after its off-Broadway premiere a few years ago. It premiered very shortly after the pandemic, and took a couple years to regroup and rewrite, and then went to Broadway. And they really, I think, crafted a great show. And the performances are these women in this show are just top of their game right now, and a lot of them are making their Broadway debuts. A lot of them are very young performers that I think we're going to see a lot more of. Are any standouts for you in terms of the performances? I mean, I feel like they all were good. There were a couple that I really liked, and I'm going to look at the cast list because, first of all, we had a couple of understudies in today, and again, shout out to the understudies because they were amazing. So we saw Huso Simon as Ida B. Wells, which is normally played by Nikki M. James, who got a Tony nomination for her work in this. And Huso was just incredible. Like, acting and singing was just so engaging. Got a huge amount of applause after her first number, which is blows the roof off of the place, I think. She plays such a powerful character. Ida B. Wells was an amazing African-American suffragist, and the suffrage movement and the show doesn't shy away from the fact that they kind of struggled to include African-American women in a way that, and there was some infighting as to how they should be included, if they should be included, and Ida B. Wells really kind of fought against that, and the show explores that really wonderfully, I think. But she was amazing. Emily Skinner, who's kind of like Broadway royalty and has a ton of credits, has a couple of she plays 2 key roles in this, and again, like a belter that like I would just pay to hear her sing anything, really. And then in terms of and then Jen Colella, who was in the original cast of Come From Away, is one of the main leads in this show. She plays Carrie Chapman Catt, who's, as we learned early in the show, has been a part of this movement for like 20 years by the time the show kind of opens. And she sort of represents the older guard of this movement, and does so in a way that like you see this internal conflict between her and Shayna Taub as Alice Paul, because Alice Paul is much younger and represents these new ideas and more radical thinking, and she wants to stage protests and marches, where Carrie Chapman Catt wants to kind of do more diplomatic dealings with the president and Congress, and both are valid, and she kind of struggles with kind of playing both sides of that. And not her as an actress. I mean, her character sort of struggles with, like, is there room for both ways of thinking in this movement? And Jen Colella does a fantastic job in this show, and really, really a joy to watch. And then there's a few younger performers that are kind of friends of Shayna Taub's character, Alice Paul, and they are all phenomenal. So that's Kim Blanick as Ruza Venslaska, Ali Bonino as Lucy Burns, and Hannah Cruz as Inez Milholland, and Nadia Dendashi as Doris Stevens. And the voices on these women are like incredible, and the harmonies that they have to sing together are so ridiculously tight.
Anytime they had small or even like larger group numbers, it was
the harmonies and vocal arrangements.
One of the things I enjoyed the most about it was all of those female voices coming together. It was very, very challenging score to sing, but they do it so well.
And they, like, all of the main cast in this, I think it was phenomenal. I really, really liked Kim Blanick as Ruja, though. So Ruja is this Polish immigrant and a socialist, and she's just like full of piss and vinegar, and like just like ready to fight at any time, and like kind of there as the comic relief a lot. And like Kim just kind of nails that role, as does Nadia Dendashi as Doris Stevens, who's the secretary of the group, and she's kind of starts off a little quiet and mousy, and then sort of develops her own voice and develops becomes a bit more crucial to the cause. And I think she played that, the character arc of that was really fun to watch. Any other standouts for you in terms of that cast? And then in terms of the tech, I mean, designing this show had to be such a challenge because of just the amount of places that this show goes. Like, there are so many locations, and there are so many costumes and different eras of women's fashion, because the times changed so much between the early 1910s to early 1920s. I mean, fashion for women changed a whole lot, and the creative team behind the set and costumes, I think, did a wonderful job with all of that. The only thing that was kind of a letdown for this show, and it was, at least for me, it was a kind of a big letdown, was the direction. And what's funny is this actually got a Tony nomination for direction, and the direction was by Lee Silverman, who is a very respected Broadway director, has a ton of credits under her name, but most of her work has been on plays and smaller musicals and things that are a bit more intimate in scope. And I think something that's this big and this epic you could kind of see that there was some struggle with how to stage it effectively. I feel like every show on Broadway that in recent memory that's been like super effective, there's been at least like one or two things in the staging that was like a pivotal, like, oh, that is indicative of Hamilton. Like the way the turntable is used in Hamilton is indicative of how that show is staged, and you can't think of that show and its staging without thinking of that turntable and how it's used. Yeah, I'm trying to think of some other good examples here of
the turntable in my biz too.
Yeah, I guess you could say that one too. Or last year when we saw Here Lies Love, the way that stage could reconfigure itself over and over again and integrate the audience into the staging was pivotal to how they were telling that story. There's nothing here that it's like you take that element out of the staging and it no longer works. There's no moment that it's like, oh, that was a beautifully staged moment that like really, like the way that was visualized and the picture that was made on stage like hit me in a way. There were a couple of moments that kind of came close, but nothing, like I constantly wanted more from the staging, and I feel like this material cries out for more, and these women deserve more. It just felt a little like I felt like I was watching a show at like a decent regional theater or high school in terms of the staging. In terms of the talent on stage, totally different story.
Right. Yeah.
But in terms of the way it was directed, it just felt overly simplistic for a show and score that's as complex as this one is. Any other thoughts?
No, I would agree. I mean, since you mentioned that the director has done more plays and smaller musicals, the way it was staged, everything felt like that. Like she didn't necessarily know what to do with that amount of people and that large of a playing space.
Right, and it very very much felt like, I mean, there's a lot of great directors, and that when they're dealing with a smaller show and a smaller cast, are just kind of like, let the material speak for itself and get out of its way, which is a great directing approach for a lot of things. But I think when you're doing an epic musical, and this is an epic musical, like this should be like a Ragtime, where it's like grand in scale, or a Hamilton, which is grand in scale because we're dealing with these incredibly important historical figures and this incredible story. Like it needs to feel big and important, and this didn't feel big and important, and I really wasn't expecting that. I was expecting it to be big and important because there have been other shows that have come before that have done that and done that extremely well. And it's funny that one of the things that I said at intermission was, the staging would be better if it had a turntable, but I'm guessing they didn't want to do that because there's another show down the street that's also telling a story that's still running, telling a story about American history, and it's using a turntable. So if they did it, they would look like they're copying. Whereas it's like Hamilton wasn't the first one to use a turntable.
No.
And we saw another one tonight that used one, and we weren't like, oh, Hamilton, but it just felt like there were a lot of missed opportunities in the way the story was told visually from a direction standpoint. The other moment that I thought was kind of weird is there's a moment involving a woman on horseback, which is pivotal to the story. Like we have to have that moment, and we have to see the horse, and like the horse looked pretty cheap, which I'm like, we had, Warhorse was just like 10 years ago. I'm not saying it needed to be that elaborate,
that level, right,
but it's like when that is possible to have basically a elevated bench with a horse head on wheels, like it was kind of a letdown. So I mean, there were a few things that I think could have been better about this show, but I would see this show again when it eventually does like regional productions, or I would love to see what another director and another creative team would do with this. Another thing that we said about the direction was like, because these are historical women, it would have been cool to like see photographs of them,
what they actually looked like,
and like see photographs that were taken in, you know, in the state legislatures when they were ratifying, you know, the women's right to vote. And like there are so many
mugshots.
Because
when they were arrested,
like half of these women get arrested for protesting. So, you know, like it would have been really interesting to have that reminder of like, no, this is real. And also in the final moment of the show, they end the show with this great number called Keep Marching On, which is all about how like, okay, they did their part and like it was messy and ugly and challenging, and there's still more to fight for, and like we as the next generation have to do that. And like it's our responsibility to like honor the people that came before us and also set, you know, everyone coming after us on the right path. And it's a beautiful number, but I really wish they reflected other generations of women that came after this generation, because the whole song was about that. And I'm like, all it would have taken is a couple of costumes of a few women from the 50s, a few women from the 60s, a few women from the 70s, all the way to now, to kind of give us this really interesting tapestry of like, look at everything that we've done and look at where we've come and look at where we're going. And like, I think that would have been a really nice sort of bow to put on this show. Yep. But instead everyone comes out in their 1913, you know, dresses, and which is kind of odd, because I'm like, wait, now we're back to where we were at the beginning. Like they were costumed in pretty much the same thing that they started the show in. Yeah. Which I thought was odd. But again, if you're in town, like I would recommend this show. I think it's again beautiful in terms of the writing, and the performances are like unreal how good these women are. But I just don't feel like this is like the definitive staging of this show. Like I feel like the revival of the show that's going to happen in 20 years is going to be a better production than this version. And that's going to be considered like the definitive version of Suffs. Whenever that happens, whenever it is eventually revived on Broadway, that's going to be the production that people copy. It's not going to be this one, unfortunately. Well, we have one more show from today to chat about, but we will leave that for another video. Bye, everybody.